Hi everyone, since I'm building my own house, my entire YouTube feed is filled with construction videos, many of which have flashy titles like A House for $1,000,000, and there are even houses for 500,000. In this video, I'll show with examples that even in 2021 it's possible to build a house out of aerated concrete blocks for $1,000,000, but I'll also explain why you personally won't be able to do it. One of my latest videos about laying the walls of my future house has already gained over 100,000 views and keeps getting more. Huge thanks to everyone for your support in the comments. Many people wrote that my example inspires them to build their own house, and many have already said that they will definitely start building next spring. That's why I feel it's my duty to warn people and show them the real picture of what you're getting into when you build your own house with your own hands. There are people who really built a house for $1,000,000. There are real cases where people managed to move into their own aerated concrete house, spending $1,300,000, including the land and utilities. That's me, so what's the point? The problem of having your own housing in our country is very serious, and many people either spend most of their lives saving up or get into mortgage slavery for 2,000 years, and all this while being in extremely difficult conditions. People see that in the video, someone was able to not only solve their housing problem for $1,000,000, but actually move into their own house. Naturally, people's eyes light up and they're sure they can do the same thing. And what happens next? A very common scenario is a family living in an apartment. If you look at the statistics on the average living space in our country, most people live in apartments up to 50 square meters, and the $1,000,000 houses in the videos are 80, even 90 square meters. After watching videos of $1,000,000 houses, people come up with a brilliant idea. Now we'll sell our apartment, move into a rental, and in a year we'll build a house with our own hands for $1,000,000, doubling our living space for the same money. And there will be space for the kids. Oh, life will be great then. What could go wrong? It's brilliant, isn't it?
It's a magnificent plan, just, if I understood correctly, reliable, like a Swiss watch.
And then, when faced with real construction, people spend all their money and never move anywhere. That's what a person thinks. But I still have a car, now I'll sell the car, and I'll definitely move in. They sell the car, and again, they don't move in anywhere. And it turns out that people end up without a house, without an apartment, without money, and without a car. They live in a rented place, and people know someone who ended up in this situation through just one handshake. That's how widespread it is, the number of people affected. It's easy to talk about your success when you're doing great and everything worked out for you, but nobody likes to talk about their failures. It's extremely unpleasant to make yourself look like a fool, and there are way fewer videos about these kinds of stories than about successful ones. You don't have to look far for examples. Here's a living example right in front of you. Yeah, my situation is a bit different. The house I used to live in burned down, and basically I ended up on the street. But since I had been dreaming of building my own house for a long time and was working toward that dream, I owned a plot of land worth about $1,200,000, and I saw two ways to solve the problem. The first was to sell the land, borrow about $200,000, and buy a one-room apartment in the city where I live. The cheapest one-room apartment costs about $1.4 million. That is, I would have my own roof over my head, but I would still keep dreaming about my own house. And the second option was to sell my plot and buy the cheapest plot, and with the remaining money, start building a small house. Yes, I would be paying for rent, but I would be moving toward my dream, not away from it, so I chose the second option. To date, I've already spent $1,000,000, and behind me is this, and I haven't moved in anywhere. Accordingly, the $1,000,000 includes the cost of the land and utilities, and even if we take a real example that inspired me, where people moved into their own house from scratch for 1.3, where is it? So even if I add another 300,000, all that will appear on the house is the roof, and again, I won't be able to move in anywhere. As it seemed to me, at first I was ready for any turn of events, and I had some kind of strategy, and I stuck to it. But in the spring, the world went crazy, and all my plans fell apart, and I was left without money, without a house, and now I'm living in a rented place. Well, at least I didn't have to sell my car, and I felt like a complete fool. Yeah, you're an imbecile. So, no matter how well you plan everything, something can always go wrong, and you always need to have a financial safety cushion, especially in something like building your own house. Since I was already experienced and understood that everything in our world is constantly changing, I adapted to the new conditions. And I have some kind of strategy again that I stick to, and basically everything is going well for me. I don't regret any of my decisions, and I will finish building the house. So, let's imagine what $1 million house looks like with real numbers that actually exist somewhere in our imagination. We'll buy the perfect plot with perfect soil, where the issues with the utility shed and all the communications have already been taken care of. There are cheap plots, and some have old houses, where the issues with sewage, water, and electricity have already been resolved. Will you personally find such a plot? Well, that's a big question. In our city, there was actually a perfect plot for sale for 450,000 rubles, but since the offer was so good, the ad on Avito didn't last long. It was up for 2 days, during which I was knocked out with a 40-degree fever, so I didn't manage to buy that plot, and I had to buy this one here in the swamp. As a project, let's take the initial version of my future house as a basis, 50 square meters without an attic. And since our plot has perfect soil, on our imaginary plot, we'll make the cheapest strip foundation and floors directly on the ground. We won't make any blind area or drainage, and in this case our foundation will cost us 150,000 rubles. We'll buy not a good aerated block, but a special one, the cheapest, and we'll lay it not with foam, but with adhesive. I calculated, and for my house, laying with adhesive would be 5,000 rubles cheaper than with foam, and altogether. So our walls will also cost us 150,000 rubles. We won't make any reinforced belt, and to avoid wall destruction from lateral load, for the roof, we'll use trusses made from joined boards and cover it with the cheapest ondulin. We'll make a cold attic, meaning we'll only insulate the attic floor. Our roof will also cost 150,000 rubles. I'll share another life hack. If I absolutely had to move into the house by any means, I would simply do it. From this very house. I would put a roof on this new house because I already have all the building materials needed to make a roof here, and the roof would cost me absolutely nothing. We'll make the window openings in the future house small, no panoramic windows. We'll buy the cheapest windows, so we'll have the entire insulated shell for just 500,000. We'll finish the walls right away with final putty directly on the aerated concrete blocks. A drywall ceiling, floors, linoleum, and even the interior work with plumbing, appliances and furniture can easily fit into the remaining 500,000. But what will the quality of all this be? Well, definitely mediocre, but it's possible to do it. All of this is possible for that kind of money. If anything, of course, I don't recommend anyone do it this way. And here, many people in the comments are like, what about a frame house on screw piles? That's a sure thing. It might even turn out cheaper, you'll be surprised. But you can't build that kind of foundation on every type of soil in our country. Plus, if you calculate a frame house that's at least close in comfort to a house made of aerated concrete, that kind of frame house will actually cost you even more. As you can see, if you have ideal conditions, building a house for $1 million is possible. But now I'll tell you a few reasons why not everyone will be able to repeat building a house for $1 million. The first and main factor is the cost of building materials. I started thinking about building my own house 3 or 4 years ago, and I also started watching videos about construction 3 or 4 years ago, and even the videos that are coming out on YouTube right now might be about building houses that started several years ago, because construction is not a quick process. I remember that 3 or 4 years ago, Aerokovsky aerated concrete blocks cost 2,300 rubles per cubic meter, and now the same blocks cost 4,500. So it's twice as expensive. Concrete used to cost 3,000 per cubic meter, now it's over 5,000. It's the same story with lumber. You don't have to take my word for it, you can check the prices yourself. Something that used to be $1 million house 3 or 4 years ago, now that same house costs 2 million, because almost all building materials have doubled in price since then. Although it would seem, what is 3 or 4 years ago? And many people who now claim their house cost $1 million are actually just telling stories, because the price of $1 million has nothing to do with today's real situation. For example, there are people who built 46 square meters for 1.3 million, but they started building 6 years ago. And I'm addressing those who watch such videos and think they can repeat it today. Doing the same thing now will not cost you 1.3 million, but actually 3 million. My deep respect to those who actually managed to build a good house for little money. It's just that those who watch such videos need to understand that it's no longer possible to repeat the same thing for the same amount of money today. You also need to understand that we live in a very large country and all other countries envy us, and prices in different regions can vary dramatically. For example, in Crimea, concrete is much more expensive than in the Leningrad region, and timber in Crimea is also much more expensive than in the Leningrad region. And if you take Rostov or Krasnodar, for example, the situation will be the opposite, and many materials will cost less than in the Leningrad region. That's why it's extremely important to take into account the region where you're building my dom izначально and its planning, to understand that it's not just a house in a vacuum. And even in Crimea, even in 2021, you can build a house out of aerated concrete blocks for 1 million. But first of all, it will be a house with an area of up to 50 square meters like in my original version. And secondly, it will be a theoretical house in a vacuum. Let me explain what I mean. For example, many self-builders don't know that the main thing is the load, and there are many about it. It's not the foundation of your house that bears the load, but primarily the base, that is, the soil under the house. And some people will have a perfect base that will forgive pouring the cheapest strip foundation right into the trench without formwork, and even backfilling with fertile soil. But for example, our St. Petersburg swamps do not forgive mistakes with the foundation. And when a person cuts corners here and there, doesn't lay enough rebar, uses a lower grade of concrete, such a scenario can end badly. I can't recall who said this phrase, but it accurately sums up everything I just mentioned. Cutting corners leads to trouble. And so you see people building foundations for 100 square meter houses for 150,000 rubles. Then you look at yours, which cost 300,000 for 50 square meters. And you're like, yeah, sure, a house for 1 million, yeah, right, screw me. A separate issue is utilities, like water. For some people, connecting water won't cost anything. I paid almost 80,000 rubles for water connection, and someone else might have to pay 180,000. For some people, material delivery will be for 20 kilometers, but for me, for example, it's 120 kilometers, and that's a completely different amount of money. When you do something for the first time in your life, it's very easy to mess up, and if you have to redo it, that's more money again, all the work for construction. This was the first time I did this in my life, not because I made a mistake, but simply because... Actually, I did mess up a bit. There are some mistakes, but they're not critical, and I won't have to redo anything. Also, by the way, since I have absolutely no experience in construction work, I'm scared to death of the angle grinder and the circular saw. And I have a real phobia about having to show how I supposedly worked at a factory for 10 years. And to make sure all your body parts stay with you by the time the construction is finished, you also need to know how to use power tools properly, and that's true at every stage of the work. So it's all these ifs. If you have perfect soil, if the groundwater level is low, if you don't mess up, if you don't get robbed. Like when my house was robbed and half of my tools were stolen. Who can predict something like that? Again, not everyone has a side cabin on their plot, and you really need one. You can't do without it, and a side cabin also costs money. Access roads to the plot, entrance to the plot. At first, even a tractor couldn't move around my plot, unless you got lucky somewhere, because when pouring the concrete, I was almost left high and dry, and I was just lucky that I only lost a couple thousand rubles, while someone else could have lost much more. That's exactly why a house for 1 million is a theoretical concept like a spherical house in a vacuum, possible only in theory and on paper. But in practice, only one person out of 100 or even 1,000 will be able to pull it off if the stars in the universe align just right for them. If all those ifs come together. To sum up, building for relatively little money is possible, building something with your own hands for the first time in your life is possible, but always make an up-to-date cost estimate with a clear head, without emotions, and be sure to include a list of all expenses. I emphasize all expenses because, for example, who included the tools needed for building the house in their 1 million ruble budget estimate? Where would a city dweller in an apartment get an angle grinder, a circular saw, or screwdrivers? You have to buy all of this, and I spent almost 50,000 rubles on tools alone. And there are a lot of such things that aren't included in the budget estimates in videos about million ruble houses. Don't set unrealistic deadlines for yourself, since things rarely go as planned on a construction site, and it's easy to run out of time to finish. Just like in my case, because of unforeseen circumstances, I didn't even manage to put a roof on the house frame this season. Try to make sure you have a reserve of both money and time, and never plan everything right up to the moment you move into the house. It will be extremely interesting to calculate the difference, how much my original version of the house without an attic would have cost, and to compare it with a specific example, a single-story house with a cold attic, and the same single-story house with an attic converted into a mansard. Will there be any point in this at all? What will be the difference in cost? And to calculate the cost per square meter using a specific example? So subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. It doesn't have to be about construction. We can just chat about life. And, as one person said, don't lose and don't get lost. See you next time.